Hello. Okay, so here we are again. We're going to be looking at a question that I was asked very recently in a roundabout way, actually. So we're going to look at, is temptation sinful? In other words, is it a sin to be tempted? So we're going to have a short answer and a longer answer. The short answer is no, it's not. We know that for sure because we know that Christ was tempted and yet he is without sin. So that's the short answer. No, it's not. But now we're going to look more into it and see what else we can draw out of the question. So a reference for Jesus's temptation is Luke 4. And Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was led by the Spirit in the wilderness for 40 days, being tempted by the devil. And he ate nothing during those days. And when they were ended, he was hungry. So we know for sure, as I said, that Christ was tempted. And Hebrews 4:15 says this: for we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, and this is the crucial part, yet without sin. So one does not equal the other. And it's to our benefit that Christ was tempted. So having taken on flesh, having taken on humanity, becoming a man, and experiencing temptation himself, and that's a greater temptation than we in our day-to-day lives will ever experience. He can identify and empathize with our sufferings and trials of our own temptations. And we see in Hebrews 2:17, therefore he had to be made like his brothers in every respect, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. And verse 18 goes on to say, for because he himself has suffered when tempted, he is able to help us, basically. So he can identify and empathize with us. And the high priest that's referenced both of those times is Christ. And in him, we have a high priest who was tempted as we are. And so not only that part, but he will provide the strength and the support and the assistance to us and for us in order for us to resist the temptations that we come into contact with and struggle with in everyday life. So Hebrews 4:16 says this: let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. And that's pretty amazing when you think of it, like to in confidence approach the throne. You know, that proves the power of Christ, basically. 1 Corinthians 10:13 says this: no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it. So not only will you not be tempted beyond your ability, your actual ability to be tempted, as it were, the range of what you can cope with is extended a lot by the fact that God will always, within the temptation, provide you with a means of escape. And lastly, on this little section, 2 Peter 2:9, then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials and to keep the unrighteous under punishment until the day of judgment. So even though it's not a sin to be tempted, it is a sin to run with it, to give into it, to encourage it in others, to deliberately tempt other people, basically to knowingly walk into it. So James 1:14 2:15 says, but each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. Psalm 1:1, blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. And finally, for this part, Mark 9:42, whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a great millstone were hung around his neck and he were thrown into the sea. So temptation comes to us through three different avenues, three enemies of the Christian walk, as it were, and these are the world, secular things, the flesh, and not as it, the flesh, our humanity, and of course, Satan. So we're not called to remove ourselves from the world. That's pretty clear. We're called, however, to be wise, innocent, and alert, like aware of what's going on. So John 17:15, I do not ask that you take them out of the world, but that you keep them from the evil one, who is, of course, in the world. 1 Peter 5:8, be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. That's pretty strong imagery. And then Matthew 10:16, behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. So according to Romans 13:14, which says, but put on the Lord Christ and make no provision for the flesh to gratify its desires, we're not to provide opportunity or provisions or make way for the arousal of sinful desires. So they may be there, but to deliberately inflame them is something that Paul certainly speaks against. And we also shouldn't therefore put ourselves knowingly into situations that we know may trip us up. And that's not to say that all things are not possible in God, and if God is on our side, who is against us, etc. But to deliberately test yourself when you could be using your spiritual gifts elsewhere and to the edification of others and the betterment of some certain situation, to just sort of skip in glibly is ill-advised at best. So Hebrews 12:1 says this, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. So we can't entirely stop desires of a sinful nature or sinful thoughts, as it were, coming into our minds, arising. We're being told not to entertain them, to resist them, and to use the power of the Holy Spirit that we have in us to counter them and to basically crucify them, as it were, put them to death. So Romans 8:13, for if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. So, it's known as mortification of the sin nature. And that's a part of living a Christian life, or at least good attempts at that. So in the same vein, we can't keep Satan from tempting us. It's not really within our remit. But we can be prayerful at all times, ceaselessly, and we can also be alert and watchful for the wiles of Satan, basically. We can be confident that he and his minions can do nothing more than God allows. God, if you think back to the story of Job, God is sovereign over everything. And as we've already seen, he will not give us temptations greater than we can bear, because there's a built-in get out clause, as it were. Satan is completely and utterly, he's dangerous, but he's an already defeated foe. And we know who defeated him, and we have a personal relationship with his master, as it were, with the person who mastered death. And also his activities are limited by his master. Job 2:6, and the Lord said to Satan, behold, he is in your hand, only spare his life. So God is still sovereign. God is still giving the final caveat to his permission. So, however, we should not invite temptation as a means of putting God to the test, obviously. And within that warning, as it were, putting others into temptation's way, for whatever reason, actually, especially when we know rather that they're particularly weak to some certain form of temptation. It's not very Christian. So 1 Corinthians 8:12, thus sinning against your brothers and wounding their conscience when it is weak, you sin against Christ. And that reminds me of whatever you do to the least of these, you have done to me. So to summarize, to wrap all of that up, if that's possible, being tempted in and of itself is not a sin. The absolute concrete proof of that is the temptation of Christ in the wilderness. However, deliberately inflaming others, putting them into the way of temptation, tempting them, and inviting temptation to yourself. I mean, it's great to have confidence in God's sovereignty, and that's of course the correct position. However, arrogance is subtly different from confidence, obviously. So don't invite temptation as a means to test yourself and to test ultimately God, because why? There's enough evil in the day, as we see in the gospel. So temptation is an entry point for sin. So it conceives sin, as we read previously. And we don't want to, if it's a doorway to sin, we don't want to be hanging around the doorway either. We don't want to be unguarded against these things, and we don't want to entice other people to stand around this analogy doorway either. So Proverbs 23:19-35 says this: hear, my son, and be wise, and direct your heart in the way. Be not among drunkards or among gluttonous eaters of meat, for the drunkard and the glutton will come to poverty, and slumber will clothe them with rags. Listen to your father who gave you life. So, by the way, I'd just say that where it says direct your heart in the way, Christianity at the time of Christ was called the way. That's, this is Proverbs, it's Old Testament, but just an aside, as it were. So temptation can lead to sin, and it does lead to sin, depending on where it's caught, kind of like an illness. It can lead to it's progressive, basically, and not in the liberal sense, although both are a bit shady. So, so it's best to guard yourself against even the instigator or the doorway to sin, if it's possible, although it's not always going to be possible. And rest assured that when you're in genuine need, that which you ask for in the name of Christ will be given to you. And also you can rely upon the Holy Spirit to convict you of sin once it's happened, but also to forewarn you and to help you maintain an alertness to dangerous situations. So, Christ encouraged an extreme aversion to sin, because I think that oftentimes mankind doesn't, I was thinking about it recently and I was reading something that was examining, is one lifetime of sin, does that marry up with an eternal punishment in hell? And if potentially from our perspective, it doesn't seem like a fair payment. However, if we review it, if we look at it through the perspective of God, how God sees sin and how detestable and outrageous literally it is to him, then we're able to view it slightly differently. And Christ, although fully tempted, still, it's better to pluck out your eye, even though that is analogous talk. It's still very strong language and it's still drawing a pretty clear picture that you may not be able to see clearly if you've just ripped out your eye, basically. So, yeah, we get a new heart of flesh, and we also are called to take captive our thoughts and to conform them to the image of Christ. So that's tacitly letting you know that you won't cease to have sinful thoughts, but it's what you do with them once they're present. So yeah, just accepting Christ doesn't mean that you're then free of any temptation, because even if aspiring to perfection allowed you to be free from sin, free from temptation, Christ would never have been tempted, and he was, because in order that he would not be ashamed to call us brothers and sisters. So yeah, I think I kind of wrapped it up. I'm going to end with this. I'm not going to end with this because this is pretty scary, but if your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it's better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away, because the same, basically, because it's better for that to happen. I tell you what I think is actually better to happen is that you take all of your worries and fears and anxieties around this and any issue to the Lord in prayer, that he's already aware of them. But if you ask for strength, and if you ask for wisdom, and if you ask for patience, and if you ask for peace, and if you ask for, all like various fruits of the Spirit, you're in a much stronger position to be able, even if you are stood somewhat near to the door, to be able to slam it firmly shut, as it were, on the manifestation of sin through temptation. So I hope I haven't, I hope I've spoken all of the things. There are numerous verses that I could have called upon, but those are just some of them. And I hope I answered the question that was asked yesterday. And if I haven't, please do follow up questions in the comment section. And yeah, that's about it for me. I will see you very soon. And in the meantime, don't forget to say your prayers. God bless you. Bye-bye.